All right. So Tuesday was exciting.
You can say that.
Or not exciting. Maybe not as exciting as anybody had hoped. But I think probably the best thing to do, everybody knows who you all are. I'd like us to maybe just go down the line. What's your preferred metaphor? You're the comic in the group. I've heard, the red wave turned into the red wedding. Can you best me, the stand-up comic?
Stark wedding.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's a continuation of a very long fight, so I wasn't.
So you're not bothered
terribly
by
surprised
historic
one way or the
trends
other.
being completely butted for the first time in 100 years. Henry, I say that as the descendant of Herbert Hoover because it was in 1934 that historic trends were butted last time. But there was a Great Depression then, so it's a little different. And I think unpacking that difference and then getting to what kind of policy outcomes we can expect against the backdrop of this new reality is the purpose of this panel. So Henry, you wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, the ultimate mea culpa, which is what you do. You said you were going to enjoy eating your crow. You had a specific Merlot that you were going to enjoy it with.
No. This is like Sideways. We don't drink Merlot. It was Pinot Noir.
The good American wine. Okay, so what did we get wrong? What did you get wrong?
What did I get wrong? A number of things. First of all, typically a president with a 44% job approval rating is going to get this hat handed to him. But the reason he didn't was because for the first time in decades, people who only mildly disapproved of him, and Joe Biden being the him, voted for the Democrats. Typically, these people who are strongly disapproves are people in the other party. The people who mildly disapproves are kind of the independents. Typically, you lose those by 20 to 40 points, and that's the margin. The Democrats won it by 4 points. So what did that mean? What that means is that the Democratic campaign worked. The Democratic campaign had basically been trying to say, don't care about the things like inflation or crime. Care about the choice between us and the scary, icky MAGA Republicans who want to cut Social Security, they want to cut Medicare, they want to end democracy, all the parade of horribles. And people were scared enough that they decided, okay, I'm going to stick with somebody that I don't like. So what does that mean? It means that there's a great opportunity to reinvent. It means, as Ronald Reagan, after the election of 1964, was writing in National Review, asked, Barry Goldwater loses by 24 points. And of course, Reagan gives this characteristically optimistic take, and he says, it's up to us to prove that that the radicalism that they said we represented is an optical illusion. And that's actually the same thing. Ronald Reagan spent 15 years proving that conservatism was actually comfortable and American and got elected. And we're not going to have to take 15 years, but we need to dispel the idea that we are radicals, crazy, who just want to destroy everything Americans hold dear. And when we do that, just like where there was an obvious person, Ron DeSantis in Florida, who could not be painted that way, he created a new coalition of Hispanics, suburbanites, Republicans, independents, and made it go all the way down in the party. We have a party that looks more like a Ron DeSantis Florida party. We will sweep the floor with them.
Mike, were you surprised?
Yeah, in a nutshell, remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like a pyramid, and at the base of the pyramid, concerns that are foundational to your life, right? Security, food, energy, right? I thought the election was concentrated in all those issues: the crime wave, the energy policies that had run amok, the inflation that was hitting people at a lot of different levels and hitting them on a daily basis whenever they saw the price of gas change, whenever they went shopping for food. And I thought if you ran an election where those are the major concerns of your candidates, that would trump, so to speak, any kind of.
You just accidentally said that word.
Yes, I did.
Because nobody else has mentioned that word yet, so I just want to point out that.
Yeah, but those being down, operating at the base of that pyramid would win if the other party was up there with pronouns and at the very top of the pyramid with some of these cultural issues. I thought there might be a time and place for that, but not this election season. So that surprised me.
Good.
Go for it.
You talked about history. This is a chart of party control of Congress. The bottom is the House, the top is the Senate. And from 1932, when Hoover lost, until 1994.
It was 34 of that 2-year cycle where he had the. Go ahead.
Yeah. In 32 32 to 94, the Democrats had control of, well, the Republicans had control of the House and Senate for 4 years. 4 years of 32 years. That's 62 years, 4 years the Republicans had control. They were the Washington Generals up against the Harlem Globetrotters. Congress runs America. The presidents can start wars and blow things up, and they can veto things and slow down what Congress wants to. Congress runs this country. And we had a one-party state for 62 years. And then in 94, the Republican Party became the party that would never raise your taxes. And 96% of the Republicans said, we're never raising your taxes. And they never did since. Only when the Democrats have all three House, Senate, and President do they ever get to raise taxes at the national level. And since then, the Republicans have been elected to control Congress 60% of the time. So when you wonder why Biden and the Democrats yell fascist, fascist, and we're a democracy, the definition of democracy was over here. We win. That's democracy when we win. It's like, like you're playing tennis with somebody and you lose. You go, well, that's not tennis. No, it is tennis. You just lost, okay? And this is democracy, and this is them losing more often than they win. So now they're playing for keeps because a couple of tweaks in the modern Democratic Party fades into oblivion. I mean, look at the direction things are heading. We were winning, the Republicans were winning the presidency more often than not, so they decided that Richard Nixon was a king and the imperial presidency and everything had to go into Congress or to the courts. Then they lost the court, so now nothing should go to the courts, and they lose Congress more than half the time. And now they've lost state legislators and governors, the majority of state legislators and governors. Where are they going to govern from? Well, it had been local government, big city political machines, blue cities, and school boards. And all of a sudden, people discovered what was happening on the school boards, and now there's a fight over the next 10 years over who runs local government. Watch, as Bloomberg says, Bloomberg claims that 12 states are moving to partisan elections for school boards and local government. I think that will happen, and that means Republicans will control more cities, not the big ones, but more medium-sized small cities and more school boards than they ever did before, because if you put a label on people, the Republicans will do well. When you go into a store and you buy things in a brown bag, you have no idea what's in there. So this is a knockdown, drag-out fight, and the other team is going nuts because this is not the way world is supposed to. I mean, Biden's an old guy. He remembers this. He's not used to this. And this has gotten worse because now they've lost, since 10 and 14, control of the legislatures. You look at, I mean, the Republicans lost a couple legislative in Michigan, one in Minnesota, one probably in Pennsylvania, but they got 2/3 majorities in a whole bunch of states, starting with Florida, of the legislature, and strengthened in a lot of the red states at the state legislative level. So if you're not running Congress most of the time, you don't run the states, presidencies will come and go, and we're starting to compete for local government. This is a huge challenge, and that's why they're grumpy. And that's why the Democrats played in Republican primaries, because they couldn't win with their candidates. They had to pick the idiot candidate for us. Then they could win in New Hampshire. Wouldn't have won without spending millions to get the wrong guy nominated. And then they go, oh, well, you nominated a crazy person. Well, you ran ads saying it was the conservative good guy to fool Republicans into voting for him. And then you pointed out he was the crazy person. If you have to play in the other guy's team in order to win, there's something wrong with your team. If you have to have groups like Forward, which is it's a Democrat group that pretends to be nonpartisan, well, and if you have to change your definition from liberal to progressive because you wore out liberal and you went to liberal because you wore out progressive because it was too associated with Stalin back in 1948, if you have to change the name of your organization, of your structures, and play in the other team's game, you're not really feeling very good about yourself. So I expected the other team to fight like heck to do it. When you looked at the state legislators, they way outspent the Republicans at the state legislative level and still didn't do what they needed to do.
Okay, take your point about $40 million being spent by Democrats in Republican primaries. Take your point about sort of the evolution of Democrats. That said, I expected, and many of us expected, to be sitting here today in a Washington that was going to have most certainly Kevin McCarthy as the leader with maybe, I don't know, maybe a 30-point margin in the House of Representatives. You know, he still may very well be the leader. Maybe he won't. We'll talk about that. But the margin's not going to be 30. It doesn't look like it. Henry, I didn't hear you say, I heard you say what you got wrong. But I'd like to just real quick, and then, because I want to move on to the policy, I just want to understand why. I'd like to hear from each of you why you think we're in this position. And more than just because of those guys. Is there not something we might have done better?
Well, there's lots of things we might have done better. Yeah, I think that Republicans, I wrote a column in the summertime that Democrats were going to make this a partisan fight, and that we needed to respond with partisan arguments, that the Republican Party is this, this, and this. What we did was do what we always do. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars on candidates making arguments, but we didn't actually sell the brand. It's kind of like if you're selling Hunt's ketchup, maybe you should put the ads up for Hunt's ketchup and not the ingredients. And so that's the one thing that we should have done, is actually fight.
So what's
for
the brand? Let me just
Republican.
Let's just because Trump endorsed 330 candidates, so he was out there. So I mean, how do you say there was no brand?
First of all, if the Republican Party brand is Trump, then the Republican Party is a minority. Is that there's a majority? It's quite clear that Donald Trump is not the ticket to win. Donald Trump's endorsed candidates did worse in states than generic Republicans. Donald Trump is a toxic figure for the middle of America, the sort of person who voted for Ron DeSantis, but didn't vote for Mehmet Oz, or didn't vote for Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania because they saw Ron DeSantis as different. They saw Marco Rubio as different. There's that middle of America that is willing to back conservative Republicans, but not inexperienced, bomb-throwing, conspiracy theorist Republicans. Yeah. And so Donald Trump is not the brand. What we did not do, and this is on the leadership, is try and defend the party brand and say, they say we're interested in a national ban on abortion. The Republican Party says that this is a state issue. We will not bring up abortion at the federal level because it was states before Roe, it will be states after Roe. Nobody said that. Nobody said this. Kevin McCarthy had an agenda for the Republicans. It was a mishmash of talking points. It was nothing as clear as what Newt Gingrich said. It was intentionally vague, and what that meant that not only did they not have something to point to, they didn't even bother to run on the things that they had poll tested and pointed out. So there was nothing out there to defend the Republican brand, and there was, you can't beat somebody with nobody. They put up a cartoon figure that said, the Republican Party is this evil ogre that's going to go eat your children and, by the way, burn down the house on their way out. And they said, what about inflation? Now, that's not a bad argument, but you might have wanted to say, and the Republican Party is this. Now, in the presidential campaign, you can't help but do that because the nominee defines your brand. But in a midterm, you should defend your brand. Okay. They didn't do it, and they had the brand defined for them. And the middle of the country, who don't like Joe Biden, weren't willing to pull the lever for Republican qua Republican because they didn't like the brand.
Mike, what's the number one thing Republicans could have done differently? Like in hindsight, our Monday morning quarterback this. What do you think is the number one thing Republicans could have done differently in order to have a different set of outcomes?
I think where Henry was just is the right place to be. Something, we had the contract with America back in the '94 election. They created the agenda this time, and I agree that I went through it. I read it a couple times, and if you ask me right now on the spot, name 4 things or 3 things or whatever from that agenda, I wouldn't get it right. I'd have to go back and reread it again. It didn't stick, and that's the problem. There has to be a handful of things that they would stand for. Most of the campaigns were okay on the core things. Inflation is bad, and we limit spending and that kind of thing. The energy issue, they had that down pat.
Inflation, energy, crime were
crime.
the really key messages. I mean, those messages were effective. They just weren't effective enough.
And they worked pretty well in a fair number of places in the country. And it put a lot of the Democratic opponents on the backpedaling because they couldn't defend the crime situation, especially. They were denying crime was a problem.
But it didn't sweep us into a massive majority.
No, well, there's what we should have done and what we could have done. That's different.
Well, let's merge them.
Okay.
What should have, could have been done?
Well, we should have had one microphone that says Republican, not 2, one that says Republican and one that says MAGA every 15 minutes, interrupting the Republican one. I never saw a report from any of the rallies that Trump did that ever mentioned inflation, taxes, spending, size of government, Ronald Reagan, anything. it's all some grievance about somebody that he didn't like. And that's what made the headlines. So what was, except for the people who were physically there who may have gotten, I mean, I assume he said something about spending and taxes and,
No.
and so on. No, not ever? Never in the whole speech? Okay. But if he did, he still, when he did the little aside thing, that's what got the news. That's what got on television. That's what got in the newspapers. The little insult on
I didn't have a
DeSantis.
platform when he ran for president. He definitely isn't mentioning policy in these rallies.
Okay, well then I was trying to suggest that perhaps he might have done that, but he was incapable of the continence of sticking on that whenever he does this. Remember he went in to help some guy who was running when he was president in Pennsylvania, and he mentioned you should chop the heads off drug dealers. And nobody ever remembers the name of the Republican he was in to campaign for. Or when he went into campaign for the two senators after 20, he never mentioned their names once or twice, and the rest of it was things that bothered him.
Is what you're saying what we should have done is not had Trump around, and then we could have had our message?
Well, that's why the could and should things are a little bit mixed up
I
here.
see.
What should we have done? If we could have, we should have nominated Ducey, the governor of Arizona. He'd have swept that seat. We should have nominated one of the statewide officers in Georgia and swept Georgia.
Right.
We should have picked the other guy in Pennsylvania.
So this is the Mitch McConnell candidate quality problem. Do you all agree with the candidate
New
quality?
Hampshire. Morse, if we'd run New Hampshire, Morse, if you just picked the candidate, the obvious candidate on policy, who didn't have a fight with Trump, we'd have won all of those.
Vanilla Republican. Vanilla Republican is better than MAGA conspiracy theorist Republican, and that's the essence of the problem. Is there a consensus on the panel on that point?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want vanilla Republican mean get along, go along, bland, and tasteless, but good,
Standard issue.
good American red, white, and blue Republican.
Okay, sorry. Well, the branding. I'm working on the branding.
Standard issue Republican?
Standard issue.
Principled and who works within the boundaries so they don't do crazy things. So they're going to present well.
Okay.
They're going to
And who's
persuade
run
people. Persuasion's important.
Who's run for school board or class president once in his life and knows what it means to run for office.
Okay. So against that backdrop, what do you guys expect? I mean, given that our prognostication powers have fallen a little bit, where do we expect the House and the Senate to end up? Because against that backdrop, we'll be able to project out what kind of policies and what kind of figures will help us with the FREOPP agenda in the next session.
I'm following this with some degree of granularity. The Senate is, if you force me to bet, I'd say the Democrats will have the majority, but the thing is, it all depends on, there's about 110,000 mail votes left to count in Reno and Las Vegas, and if Catherine Cortez Masto wins them by 20%, she wins, and if she wins them by 15%, she loses. So that's just, I don't know which of those things is going to happen. So, but if she does, then the Democrats will control the Senate. McCarthy will be Speaker. The question is, will McCarthy be Speaker with literally 218 votes, and he has to vote every single time to keep his majority, or will he have a majority more like Pelosi right now, where he's got 4 votes or 7 votes? It's somewhere in that 218 to 225, but you would have to have the most unbelievably bad late votes across many different jurisdictions. I mean, I was just looking right beforehand. Ken Calvert, who has been behind in Riverside, pulled ahead with the latest vote drop in Riverside in the last hour. Lauren Boebert, who was behind this morning, is ahead now with the late vote count in Democratic-leaning counties, because people who vote late are people who tend to be conservatives who don't trust the system. So what it means is McCarthy will be Speaker with a very small majority.
Right, but Lauren Boebert's addition to the conference isn't entirely helpful to Kevin McCarthy.
Well,
maybe sometimes.
Hope springs eternal. That maybe a near-death experience can let her know that she should spend more time doing the job of a politician, less job doing the time of a press hack on Twitter.
I asked that lady if she would sign the pledge not to raise taxes, and the answer was she thought it might make her seem too extreme. Okay, there's a certain amount of judgment there that's missing.
All right, so given that we suspect there will be a very divided Hill, and that's where the legislative progress happens, it's certainly not going to happen administratively or from the White House, from the administration. Do you all have any hope for our kind of progress for, okay, because at the state level, you had a lot of progress in terms of flat tax. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, federal government's vaguely interesting, but it's going to be, if the Republicans have a narrow majority in the House and it's frozen up on the Senate side, neither team is able to inflict permanent damage on the other. You can have some stupid spending, but not a new spending program. You could have some executive orders, but not something that sticks around forever. What we will have a series of Supreme Court decisions which move the country decidedly back to where the Constitution was originally meant to be. The left will go nuts because they could see the whole country going like this when Congress is locked. But at the state level is where we can have an awful lot of fun. Right now, there are 8 states with no income tax, and there are 10 states moving to no income tax. There are 9 states with a single rate tax, and 5 states voted last year to go to a single rate tax. Arizona, Idaho, Iowa, Mississippi, Georgia, and another 5 will move in the next year and a half. So the red states, largely, are moving their income taxes down dramatically, and California, you saw, voted against a tax increase that the governor was opposed to, and they beat this thing that would take it from 13.5 up to 15%. Because they were tired of losing people from the state, and they said, this is crazy, we can't do this. You saw in New York, the governor's telling people, stop doing this to the legislature, stop doing these tax increases. Eventually, the blue states will have to pull back as the red states give them tax competition. Add to that the school choice competition in a state like Arizona, which is just going from a top rate of 4.5% to a single rate of 2.5% in January. So their income tax, 2.5%. They're sitting next to the nice people in California who can walk across the border there and go to a state with an income tax that's 10%. Well, it's 2.5, not 13.5. And it gives you $6,400 per child to go to the school of your choice, to the homeschool of your, you can keep it for homeschooling, you can go to parochial school, you can go to a charter school, you can go to the public school down the street, this is your money, and you don't have to be poor or handicapped or something, it's not just for some people, it's for anybody in the state, and more states, red states, are doing that. So at the state level, we're seeing tremendous competition, and the advantage that Republicans have is our ideas work. So we can do them in one state and then take them across. When the Democrats said, let's have single payer, so they passed it in Vermont. And then they had to repeal it in Vermont because you can't do something fundamentally that stupid in one state and then everyone will see that it doesn't work. Massachusetts, when Dukakis was running against Bush in '88, they passed something like single payer. It was mandates and stuff. Their idea of government-run health care at the time, Clinton care. And so they said, well, we've got this up in Massachusetts. Well, it hadn't been put into place. It hadn't, but as soon as Dukakis lost, they repealed it. Because this is the thing they wanted to impose on the country, they were scared to impose on Massachusetts. Well, if those are Democrat ideas can only be done at the national level because they're damaging and stupid and they hurt everybody. But if everybody goes down 2%, what happened? We don't know what happened. Why did things, But in one state, if you do that, everyone goes, that's what happened. That's what was wrong. That piece of legislation did it. So we can go state to state with everything from welfare reform to transparency to all these other issues that Republicans succeed on, do them in 10 states, and then you take them to Washington. Criminal justice reform. Yep. That was it was red state by red state by red state, and then even we got the Democrats to agree to stuff in DC. So we play at the state level, and then, yeah.
Mike.
What you're saying is at the state level, there's infinitely more competition. Because one state tries something, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't infect other states. There can be a wall to stop that from spreading. Whereas if it does work, all of a sudden other governors or state leaders are coming in saying, how do we make this work in our state? And that in Congress right now, and in both chambers, and relative to the executive branch, there's stagnation and there's gridlock. And it's almost perfect gridlock when you think about it. It looks like if the House majority is just a few seats, it's hard. When I worked for Kevin McCarthy.
I was going to say, having worked for McCarthy,
Yeah.
how do you suspect he'll navigate this?
Well, his style of leadership is sort of an executive model of, his version of division leaders and all that in the corporation would be committee chairs. And he gets his committee chairs together on a regular basis, and he gives them great leeway to work within their jurisdictions to move an agenda. Newt Gingrich, for example, used to create task forces with maybe one person on the committee of jurisdiction, but all these other members who are interested in the issue momentarily. And
That's
the
a very
committee,
policy-focused way to organize, right? Do you suspect Kevin will do that?
I think he'll bring people in, but he's going to rely on the committee chairs and the subcommittee chairs to be actual leaders, and they'll get the last word on almost all the major issues that they have to consider. But the trick here is that the majority is going to be so small that any group of a handful of members can go to the whip before a vote and say, you don't have our votes yet. We want one more thing in this bill. And if they don't get it, they'll vote no on a rule, and you can't let rules go down. That's when you start losing control of everything. And if they get what they want, the question then becomes, is there another group of members who say, wait a minute.
Who's incentivized by that behavior?
And then you have this back and forth with different factions. And that's leadership test. The big leadership test is, can you negotiate and maneuver between and among all those factions and be able to move things. I mean, they're going to have big spending bills, and they're going to have debt ceiling increases. Those kinds of things must pass. Do you want to have a shutdown or not? Part of that's going to be influenced by the Senate. If the Senate is a 51-49 Republican Senate, then they can actually get to the point where they figure out how to move things to the president's desk. So at a minimum, you can create policy differentiation. Even if the president vetoes it, at least people figured out this is that brand. This is what the Republicans stood for on this or that issue. If the Senate is 50-50, then they can gang up on the House, and the House is going to be a blocking institution over and over and over again. It's a little bit different.
You only need the 41 to stop to keep a filibuster. You don't. If you deny the Democrats 60 votes in the Senate, you can govern from the Senate. That's what Mitch McConnell did during Obama's presidency.
He governed with 40.
And those little, yes, just a little more than 40. And all those right-wing congressmen who go, oh, we're going to run everything. No, they made themselves and the House irrelevant, and the Senate ran everything, and they're over there going, oh, but we won't give you our vote to do this, and the train's gone that way, and then they're wondering what happened.
Is there, Henry, how are you thinking about policy reforms, or frankly, any kind of policy agenda that can happen in the next 2 years before, the presidential circus really is underway?
I think that what they need to, first of all, I don't think that the House should let the structure of Kevin's leadership get to the point where we're going to have that constant negotiation. I think they should.
Wasn't that up to Kevin if he becomes a leader?
Well, that's what I mean. I think what Kevin needs to do is bring people together and say, look, we've got to hang together or the Democrats will divide us. And that means we actually need to work out before January, what are the 10 things we're going to do? Who's in charge of putting together? Do you agree that as long as the bill that comes out of oversight does this, this, and this, that you will vote for it and you're not going to do it? He needs to make it, treat it more like, if you're in a multi-party system in a country, what you do is you take months before you form the government, but then you have a 64-page contract that everyone agrees to. He needs to think of it that way. You need to think of the Freedom Caucus as kind of like a separate party. And we need to have a coalition agreement that they get something, we get something, and everyone agrees before you step in the door. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, you're going to have bid-a-thon, bribe-a-thon, games playing, and that's going to send both a signal of incompetence, and being the media, it will elevate the least serious people. The Lauren Boeberts, the MTGs will get the airtime as being the face of a Republican Party that can't rule, that lets these people be the tail that wags their dogs. Kevin's got to get on top of that, or that's what's going to happen.
And the whip operation is crucial to all that as well. And the key footnote to what Henry just said is, depending on the final number, you're going to need to have a success rate of 95, 96% on every vote. You won't be able to lose more than just a handful of members out of 220 something. And it can be done. It can be done, but it is, think about one small group decides to, they don't like something. Maybe even it's just a regional or state thing, and sometimes that's what pops up,
As we think about sort of the next 2 years and what we can do in order to be a winning party at a national level, and I want to come to the audience after this question, so if you have questions, please get ready. Who are the leaders and the figures that have emerged this round and that you're keeping your eye on that can do what you said, Henry, sort of be that brand and sell the ideas that we're supporting here at FREOPP?
Yeah, well, I think Jim Banks is trying to be that person in the House. He's been spending a lot of that time at the RSC. He's running for whip now. Is that what he declared his?
I think so.
Yeah. Whether he's whip or not, he's clearly somebody who has a lot of influence in the conference. And
I mean, even beyond Congress, too. Take Congress for sure. Who are the members in the
Ron
House and
DeSantis.
Congress? DeSantis.
He's created his own brand. He's basically a mature adult leader who doesn't back down. He projects resolution. He's kind of Churchillian in some ways when he puts his mind to it, and has good judgment on the policies.
Grover.
Short-term Youngkin, he needs to get the Senate and pass 3 important things going into 24. He could run
What are those 3 things?
school choice, go to a single rate tax on the way to 0, and pick the 3rd one, something on crime. But as long as he doesn't have to get the income tax to 0. He just has to set it on the path to 0 with triggers, the way North Carolina's done it, and Kentucky just did it, and a number of states are doing that. Watch Texas. I mean, Texas is Florida bigger. And
Drier.
Better barbecue.
they don't have a legislature as good as the Florida legislature in terms of working with the governor. But I think governors will, watch Iowa, Reynolds in Iowa. They took a top rate of 8.6% taxes and they're bringing it down to 93. Sorry.
But I agree we should watch Kim Reynolds. Audience, reactions to what you've heard,
I'm on stage,
questions
I'll
about
call
the
you.
election, questions for whoever's calling Grover.
They had a question, yeah.
Yeah.
Young lady in the red.
Hi, thank you for the panel. Insofar as part of Trump's appeal was that he had a vision for what fighting looks like, what alternative visions for fighting do you guys see that might be compelling to, both compelling and convincing to voters as putting up as strong a fight as what Trump's vision was?
Define what's at stake in the debate, lay out why your vision is better and more appealing to the average voter, the average citizen, and stick to it in a way that doesn't look like you're gratuitously trying to create havoc and chaos. You're doing it as a matter of principle to make their lives better.
Okay, let me go over here, and then we'll come back over here.
Hi. Long term, was this basically the best case scenario for Republicans? Gridlock will probably come to Congress and MAGA has been rejected?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Well, I mean, has this, did we dodge a bullet, is I think what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
In some way, like, he's saying, even though we expected this huge majority and we expected a red tsunami, in some ways, does the repudiation of Trump, to the extent that that's the lesson learned from this, is that a good lesson for Republicans to learn?
Yeah, I mean,
Did I capture the essence of your
Yeah,
question?
and it seems like we kind of accomplished stopping Democrats from ruling Congress too.
Yeah, we
So
didn't
both.
hand them the keys to the car, but we've also repudiated Trump. Is this in some ways a good outcome?
I don't know if it's a
Henry.
good outcome, but that's the outcome that we should pursue, which is we didn't get what we want. We didn't get what we want in large part because a toxic man gave us other toxic people who alienated the people who need to be part
But the
of.
voters' rejection of those toxic people, is that good for the country or good for the party?
it's got to be good for the party. Yeah, I'd rather have Dr. Oz in the Senate, but the fact is it shows something that becomes obvious to everybody, which is that we can't take that chance. We actually have to be sane. We have to move forward, and that's a lesson that we can learn going forward.
Can I say one thing about the backdrop, again, for 2024? If you look at the seats that are up, there's 10 Republican seats up in 24. They're all in red
Senate.
states.
In the Senate.
Senate.
In the U.S. Senate, yeah. They're all from red states, pretty much bright red states. Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, North Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, Missouri. And the senators that are in those seats, to me, look like they should have no trouble getting reelected. There's 21 seats that are in Democratic hands, and I counted about 11 that are either purple or red states, including Manchin, for example, in a red state. So if you're looking at that map, for one thing, you're Schumer and you want to move anything, if he actually has control, let's say it's 50-50, then he's going to have a lot of nervous Nellies in his caucus saying, wait a minute, Chuck, I can't vote that way. And he may be able to, maybe there's one you can get rid of at any given time, but if you have that razor thin margin, there's no room for anybody except if Manchin says no, again, that's it. So they're going to have that dynamic, and the Republicans are going to be able to look at these vulnerable states and say, we can put strong candidates up and take back the Senate with a comfortable margin in 24. It's going to hamper the maneuverability in the Senate for the Democratic leader.
Coming back to you here in the center.
So we still don't know about Blake Masters as far as I'm aware, but with J.D. Vance in Ohio, he got elected. So, I mean, I'm not full in on the details, but he obviously got Trump's blessing to get in there. But he was kind of an outsider guy. I mean, do you think there's a case that maybe too pessimistic on his ability to kind of be like enculturated, and once he can have his own platform as a senator, maybe he's not exactly how he kind of campaigned.
Maybe
like
he can go back to not being crazy.
Yeah,
that he became crazy.
People recreate their brands once they get in. I mean, what
Yeah,
do
he
you
definitely
guys?
recreated his brand after Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah. So what do you kind of think about that and the forcing function of just joining the U.S. Senate?
When he did his acceptance speech, he mentioned maybe 20 people. One of them wasn't Trump. So I'm not sure that he was.
The transformation has started?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
When Sassy got elected, promising to vote against Mitch McConnell, Sassy out of Nebraska, Sass. And the next day when he got elected, he says, "I'm voting for Mitch McConnell." Okay. Had our friend out of Arizona, our friend in Arizona wins the Senate race, he'll be a standard issue Republican. I mean, the challenge there was not that he was crazy; it's that he'd never run for anything before. Okay, and he wasn't up to speed to do the job that you needed to win. He got picked for personality. Oz is the same. Oz would be a fine Reagan Republican. His wife is a great Reagan Republican. He would have been, but he wasn't a candidate, and that was a challenge. He wasn't stuck with particular MAGA issues, but he was picked because the president picked him. And if you're picking people, because if you ever see his list, oh, you should like him, he's been on TV a lot. I mean, that was the endorsement from Trump. And the other guy was a football player. I know lots of football players. I wouldn't run all of them for Senate.
Sir.
What does this mean for no labels, which was having an upswing, maybe even a candidate in the desperation and fear about the Donald?
Let's add to that question. So the question is, what does this do for no labels? Let's add to that question the Forward Party. There was sort of this independent movement and agitation around the outsides that there needs to be a third alternative.
Yeah, so you go back to 2016. For all the talk that Hillary and, this is sweet meteor of death, 2016 bumper stickers and stuff because everyone hated them. The fact is 80% of Americans liked one of the two. Hillary Clinton had 40% people who liked her, and Donald Trump had like 38%. Only 18% didn't like both. Exit poll basically asks the same question about favorable ideas of Biden, favorable towards Trump. They have 40% of the people who like them. 18% don't like both. You cannot build a no labels, forward, whatever you want to call it, party on 18% in the system that we've got. Because the 18% don't even agree on things amongst themselves, and even if they did, 18 is less than 40, which is less than 40. So this has always been media-driven, fancy, crazy stuff. There are people who are between the two 40s, and it should be our job to get a supermajority of that 18 to start liking Team Red and disliking Team Blue, but there is no constituency for any of these vanity projects.
Can I suggest that what the people in this room, the Freedom and Progress, are doing gets you to where you want to go? Bertolt Brecht was the communist dramatist who, when the East Germans were in revolt, the workers were in revolt against the Communist Party of East Germany, somebody stuck a microphone and, well, what do you think of that? Because it's kind of embarrassing to have the workers revolting against the workers' paradise. And he said, well, we must elect a new people. And I don't know if he was joking or if he just was stuck there, but we can elect a new people, okay? When you hand everybody in Arizona $6,400 to go to whatever school they want, you have changed the nature of every parent. You've changed the future of every child. When you pass concealed carry permits, and 21.5 million Americans have a concealed carry permit, those are different people than the guys who say, well, if something goes wrong, at least the government will come and draw a circle, a little chalk mark around me. And that's very helpful to have government services like that. No, I think I'll be in charge of my own protection. Thank you. The laws that allow people to be independent contractors make you non-unionable, okay? You cannot be forced into a union if you're an independent contractor. The Ds want to make that illegal. We want to make that for everybody. So in each state, we can, that's why why is Florida as good as it is? Because before DeSantis, you had Bush and you had Scott, both of whom changed the laws to make it much easier to make more Republicans out of the very voters you had. Why is Texas better than California with similar demographics? Because in Texas, you're expected to work and welfare is not worth going for, so you don't do it. And you get different people in Texas than you have in California over time. And in the red states, we can create more Republicans and more people who are independent, self-confident. What are IRAs and 401ks all about? Making everybody independent in their own retirement. 58% of Americans have a 401k or an IRA. Great polling from Rasmussen years ago said if you have $5,000 in a 401k, made you 20% more Republican on average. And that's for whether you're rich, poor, anything else. Because those people look at the stock market and they know what happens and they care about that, which Biden told everybody you weren't supposed to. So we can, and the work that Freedom and Progress does, can make more, leave the partisanship, people with self-control, who run their own lives, who are independent, who don't expect anything from the rest of the, they don't want to steal other people's money. They want to do their own thing. The whole religious liberty issue. We can create more Republicans, more self-contained, independent people who run their own lives and don't ask for other people's stuff.
All right, on that, Henry, Mike, Grover, thank you guys very much, and thank you all for your questions.